Welcome back to Lantern Insights. Today we're going to be showcasing a game with the mono blue version. Put a card here for the deck tech on that. And this is a deck that I've been kind of liking this. I think it's a very underexplored angle of Lantern. One thing, I personally, when it came out, kind of went, doesn't seem totally great in Lantern. Maybe a bit too many counter spells, not enough discard. Probably didn't play it as much as I should have when it first kind of came out and started putting up its result. But I've been playing it a decent amount the last week, and I'm sort of liking it. Still not totally sold on it, but I think it definitely has some potential, and there's definitely room for a lot more testing than has happened with this deck. So I think this hand, I think it's a pretty reasonable hand to start on. You have some interaction plus bridge is usually a pretty good combination, as most of their early turns bridge renders irrelevant, and then we have the protection for bridge if they have an answer to it. So I think with the mono blue version, it's fine to keep a hand like this. I think similarly, if it was discard spells, I don't know how likely I would be to keep this hand if it was 2 discard spells plus bridge. I think I'm probably more likely to mulligan it, just because I'd rather have ways of protecting bridge once it's down. Obviously, the hand isn't great, but it's not also not terrible. And they lead on Thoughtseize. So here we're either looking at Grixis Shadow or Dimir Shadow, some sort of Shadow deck, or the Dimir Ring piles are going to be the kind of two main decks, like main decks that you'll see that play this combination of cards. And in this game, I'm going to try to kind of highlight why, how to tell what's in your opponent's hand here. Without counterspell, we're just going to run out a Shredder. Pretty easy play there. They do shock in their other land into another Thoughtseize, so it is looking more like Shadow. I mean, they're down to 12 already, and importantly, they left us with Ensnaring Bridge, and so I think that does tell us a lot about the construction of their hand, that they have to have some other answer for Ensnaring Bridge, because Shadow, obviously, game 1, it's very difficult for them to beat a resolved Ensnaring Bridge, and so they must have some way of interacting with it. Otherwise, they would have just taken the Ensnaring Bridge. And because they left 1 mana up, I think it's stubborn. It has to be Stubborn Denial that they have, and I'm confident enough in that read that I will play the game. Like, I will play the rest of the game as though they had Stubborn Denial in hand, because of the combination of them not taking Ensnaring Bridge and then leaving 1 mana up. Like, if they didn't take Bridge and then tapped out, they might have a Force, they might have another answer, but because they're not taking Bridge, we have to assume that they have some way of answering it, and I think Stub is the most realistic here. And you're going to see this actually becomes very relevant in a second, where they're going to get to play out we're going to use this go get Lantern, but when they play their Shadow, it's only a 3/3, which means Stubborn Denial is not online, because Stubborn Denial requires a 4 drop, or sorry, 4 powered creature. And so of course we're gonna whir here. It is nice in the mono blue version just having access to Otawara, as it can be a pretty good like safety valve. Usually buy you a turn. And with double bridge off the top, we're just gonna play bridge and then bridge again, and hope that if they have a counter spell or something in hand. I mean, we assume they have Stub, but we don't have any ways of dealing them damage. I think they would have cast Thoughtseize if they could have last turn, just to grow the Shadow. So of the 4 cards in hand, one of them is going to be Stubborn Denial. Likely they have some number of Fatal Pushes. I think probably 1, as common card in Shadow. They could have a Drown in the Lock here, but we're not too worried about that with double bridge. We know they don't have Thoughtseize. They could have another land, another bauble. They could have Bowmasters here. Those are the kind of the cards, and for the most part, we don't really care about too much of those. They were more focused on taking our counter spells than taking our bridge. Yeah, and they concede to bridge here. They actually said in chat that they did have Stub in hand, and that was kind of their main interaction. Obviously, if they have double Stub here, I mean, they only delay Ensnaring Bridge for 1 turn, so we're not too worried about that. But it's nice to have and like they saw Shredder plus second bridge. Like they're done here. There's nothing really that they can have in hand that matters in this scenario, as we will be empty-handed, don't have to worry about counter spells clogging up our hand or anything like that, and we'll just pull away from there. Now let's get into sideboarding for Shadow. In terms of sideboarding for Shadow like this, we like to bring in the 4 Emeries. I think it's a very good card here. Yes, they will have lots of removal, but they showed us Esper lands, not red lands, so it's not super likely that they have Bolt. I think their removal, is going to be cards like Fatal Push, Sheoldred's Edict, things like that, which they likely have removed, as we showed them no creatures game 1, and so it's likely correct for them to board those out. So Emery's just a very good value piece. One thing about Emery is that I would like some number of Mishra's Bauble's main deck. It provides a lot of card advantage with Emery, but that wouldn't actually be great in this matchup because of Bowmasters. So, in some other matchups it would be very good, but here we end up being fine not having the Baubles. And then Welding Jar, as most of their removal is Destroy. In terms of what we're taking out, Crucible of Worlds, it's just too slow in this matchup. We're unlikely to be needing constructs every turn forever. I think it's a bit too slow to find off Whir of Invention. We'd usually rather just get an Ensnaring Bridge instead of a Crucible of Worlds. Needle, we leave the 1 in to put on Engineered Explosives or Odawara if they have either of those, but that's kind of all we need it for. Cookbook, Surgical, and Map. Surgical and Map I think I likely take out anyway. They don't have a ton of great surgical targets, and the life can be matter. Map, again, it's more of a slower, grindier card. And Cookbook, you could leave it in this matchup. I think if you only wanted to bring in 3 Emery, or if you're only playing 3 Emery side, that would be fine. But that's how I sideboard for this. Again, Welding Jar and then Emery, as they won't likely have much creature removal, are the key takeaways. One other card that you could bring in for Shadow is Leyline of Sanctity, as they do tend to play a lot of Thoughtseize effects. However, we don't have that in this sideboard, so it's not something that we'll bring in, obviously. And we do start on Mulligan here, but we're kind of playing Preordain is going to help to lessen the severity of those mulligans, as it's pretty good at finding. It's not quite Ancient Stirrings level, but it is good card selection. And of course they lead on Thoughtseize, like I talked about, where the Leyline would be useful if we had it, but obviously not drawing it. I do lead on the fetch land here, as I like, it's minor deck thinning. I don't think 1 life is going to be super relevant. And the fetch land, some people are asking what it's in there for. Mainly just to loop with Crucible if you need it. It doesn't come up super often, but there are a few niche cases where it is relevant. So we find Odawara and Shredder here. We're going to put both of those. I think I left the Shredder on top. Game log here says 2 bottom, but I think that's just an error on the replay, as maybe I put Shredder on the bottom and just drew another one. Here we're just going to run out double Shredder and Bell. They gives them the opportunity to burn a counter spell here, but they can also be incentivized to hold it for bridge. One reason to run it out here is it makes all of your Metallic Rebukes and Emery get a lot better, and of course just mana efficiency. There's definitely some argument to on their side countering this, and they did think, like I remember at the time they used a good chunk of their clock, not like an insane amount, but they used some time thinking on the Shredder, and so I know they're going to have some interaction up, whether that's Drown in the Lock or Counterspell, either of those. And importantly here, I can beat Drown in the Lock with Whir of Invention because I only have 3 cards in my graveyard. Drown in the Lock I can beat. So if I cast Whir of Invention, X equals 4, they can't counter it with Drown in the Lock. And here, this Bowmasters, like against us, it's such a slow clock. Like honestly, I would take it out. It depends on what your sideboard is, but I think there are so many cards that are more relevant against us than Bowmasters. And here they tap to play a Death Shadow. This one is going to be a 4/4, so if they have double Stubborn Denial, then we are in a bit of trouble. But here we're likely going to be able to bait the counterspell with Whir of Invention, as they can only have one counterspell or Drown in the Lock, and if it is Drown in the Lock, then we're pretty good here. We're going to just pay 1. Obviously we want to have the Shredder up if we find a Lantern, and this is kind of the strength of Whir of Invention in all builds, regardless if it's mono blue, Esper, the builds that were winning the Pro Tour, where you can end step Whir of Invention, kind of force them to have a counter, and then Ensnaring Bridge, where you play 2 things that they have to counter in 1 turn cycle, and then they are not able to. In terms of what they have in their hand, again, this game, it's kind of hard to tell. They likely don't have a Stubborn Denial. I think they would have probably used that as it. They might have used the counterspell. They could have removal, likely not on Thoughtseize. They definitely don't have a Thoughtseize Stubborn Denial combo or anything like that. And here we are going to lead on. Sorry, we're going to play Bridge first, and then play Emery. And we're looking for a Lantern of Insight to get milled, and we don't find one. I'll go through it. They don't play out too long here. I think they realize they're dead. We do happen to blind mill a Fracture, which would be an answer to Bridge. However, even if they answered Bridge, they wouldn't be attacking us for enough that we'd be able to replay it with Emery. Here, obviously, we just keep milling ourselves until we hit Lantern, and then we're just able to play that every turn. We can also Emery back an Expedition map, go get Urza Saga, play Urza Saga, get Lantern in a few turns. Takes a little bit, but it's not nothing. Likely here, on our next turn, we'd Emery back another Bridge, as we see cards like Fracture that are able to remove Bridge. Importantly, Fracture doesn't hit Emery, which can be relevant if we don't have a second Bridge. Fracture is the type of card that some of us are looking for a good black-white removal spell similar to Assassin's Trophy in Modern Horizons 3. So hopefully we get a good option that doesn't require green mana for removal in the next set, next Horizon set. But anyway, just showcasing mono blue version. I think there's a lot of room to explore this shell. Having access to counter spells gives the deck a dimension that we don't usually have, and so I think it's always worth trying out. Anyway, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.